I was 16 when my parents decided I was no longer their responsibility. There was no dramatic argument, no screaming match, no warning. Just a quiet dinner where my father cleared his throat and said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself now." My mother stared at her plate, nodding like this was a reasonable, mature decision and not the moment they were destroying their own child's sense of safety. I remember asking, did I do something wrong? My father didn't answer directly. He just said I was too difficult, too ambitious, and always questioning their authority. Apparently, wanting more than survival made me ungrateful. That night, my mother handed me a small suitcase and told me to pack only what I needed. She said it gently, almost kindly, like she was helping me prepare for a vacation. I packed clothes, my school books, and a framed photo of myself from when I was younger, back when they still smiled at me without resentment. When I stood at the door, waiting for one of them to stop me, to say it was a mistake, neither of them moved. My father opened the door. My mother said, "You'll understand someday." And just like that, I was homeless. I slept on friends' couches, in basements, sometimes even in my school library when no one noticed. I worked after school washing dishes, then stocked shelves at night. I went to class exhausted, pretending everything was normal because admitting the truth felt more humiliating than hunger. I stopped asking for help because help always came with judgment. What hurt the most wasn't the cold nights or the empty stomach, it was knowing my parents were living comfortably in the same house while convincing themselves they had done the right thing. Years passed without a single call. No birthdays. No holidays. No, "Are you okay?" I stopped expecting anything from them. I learned how to survive on my own, how to rely on discipline instead of motivation, how to turn anger into fuel. I put myself through college on scholarships and night jobs. I failed more times than I succeeded, but every failure reminded me of something important. No one was coming to save me, and that was exactly why I would win. By 25, I had a stable career. By 28, I was earning more than my father ever had. By 30, I owned a beautiful apartment, traveled when I wanted, and built a life that didn't revolve around approval. I didn't post much on social media, but success has a way of traveling through gossip. Old neighbors talked. Relatives whispered. And somehow, it reached my parents. The first message came on a random Tuesday. "We miss you." That was it. 3 words from my mother after more than a decade of silence. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. Miss me. They didn't miss me when I was cold, scared, and sleeping on floors. They didn't miss me when I skipped meals to pay tuition. They didn't miss me when I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't worth fighting for. I didn't respond. But that didn't stop them. A week later, my father sent a longer message. He said they had always been proud of me, that they had talked about me often, that they regretted how things ended. Regretted. Not apologized. Regretted. As if kicking out a teenager was just an unfortunate misunderstanding instead of a deliberate choice. He asked if we could meet, as adults, and put the past behind us. I should have ignored it. I knew better. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I wanted to see them, not because I missed them, but because I wanted to understand how people who abandoned their child could suddenly feel entitled to a reunion. So I agreed to meet them at a cafe halfway between our homes. They arrived dressed nicer than I remembered. My mother hugged me tightly, crying instantly, like she had rehearsed it. My father shook my hand with pride shining in his eyes. They complimented my career, my confidence, my success. It felt surreal listening to them describe me like they had been part of the journey. My mother said, "We always knew you'd do great things." That sentence almost made me choke on my coffee. Always knew. They had thrown me out with a suitcase and silence. Then the real reason surfaced. My father mentioned how difficult things had become financially. My mother talked about health problems. They casually slipped in how family should stick together, and how it would be nice to be closer again. I realized then that this wasn't about love. It was about convenience. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me that could now be useful. They asked if I could help them, a little. Just advice at first. Then small favors. Then financial support. My mother even joked, "Maybe one day you'll take care of us like we took care of you." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. Took care of me. They had abandoned me at 16. But instead of confronting them immediately, I smiled. I told them I'd think about it. That night, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights, replaying every word, every fake tear, every manipulative pause. I felt something settle deep inside me, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. They didn't deserve my forgiveness, my money, or my time. But they did deserve to understand the consequences of their choices. And I knew exactly how to teach them. Not with yelling, not with revenge fueled by rage, but with the truth they had spent years avoiding. I agreed to meet them again, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to see how far their sudden affection would go. We chose a nicer restaurant this time, one my mother clearly recognized from my social media posts. She dressed carefully, trying to look elegant. My father wore a watch that looked new, probably bought on credit. They smiled too much, laughed too loudly, and kept telling me how proud they were, as if repeating it enough times could rewrite history. Over dinner, they asked questions they should have asked years ago. How was work? Did I enjoy my job? Was I seeing anyone? Where did I live exactly? My mother's eyes lit up when I casually mentioned my apartment. She asked how many rooms it had, what the view was like, whether I owned it or rented. I answered vaguely, letting them fill the silence with their assumptions. My father nodded approvingly and said, "See, we raised you to be strong." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I excused myself to the restroom just to breathe. When I returned, the conversation slowly shifted, just as I knew it would. My father cleared his throat and said life had become unfairly difficult for them. My mother talked about rising costs, medical bills, and how lonely the house felt now. Then came the line they had clearly planned. "Family helps family," my mother said softly, reaching for my hand. "We thought, maybe you could help us get back on our feet." She didn't say how. She didn't need to. The expectation hung in the air between us. I looked at them and saw strangers wearing my parents' faces. People who had made a choice years ago and were now hoping success could erase consequences. I smiled and said, "Of course. I understand." Relief washed over their faces instantly. My father exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. My mother squeezed my hand and said, "We knew you'd forgive us." I didn't correct her. Forgiveness wasn't what I was offering. Over the next few weeks, I played the role they wanted. I answered calls. I visited their house. I listened to stories about how hard things had been without me. I let them believe we were rebuilding something. But every visit showed me the same pattern I remembered from my childhood. Nothing was ever their fault. Every problem was blamed on bad luck, other people, the economy, or me leaving. Never once did they say, "We were wrong." Not once did they apologize for kicking out a teenager with no safety net. Then the requests became clearer. My father asked if I could help cover a bill, just this once. My mother hinted about moving closer to me because, "You're doing so well now." One evening, she casually said, "This house is too big for us anyway. Maybe someday we'll live with you." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to reopen the past, I would let them, fully. At our next dinner, I told them I had something important to share. They leaned in eagerly, clearly expecting good news. I told them I was doing well not because of luck, but because of the years I spent surviving on my own. I talked about sleeping on couches, working double shifts, skipping meals, and feeling invisible. My mother's smile faded slightly. My father shifted uncomfortably. I continued calmly, describing the night they kicked me out, the suitcase, the silence, the years without contact. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. My mother interrupted, saying, "We thought you'd be fine. You were always strong." I nodded. "I was strong because I had no choice," I said. "Not because you believed in me." My father tried to defend himself, saying they were young, stressed, doing their best. I looked him in the eye and said, "Your best left a child homeless." The table went quiet. For the first time, they didn't know what to say. Then I set the boundary. I told them I would not give them money, a place to live, or financial support. I said I was willing to have a relationship only if it was honest and without expectations. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the performative kind this time. My father looked angry, then embarrassed. He said, "So you're punishing us?" I shook my head. "No, I'm protecting myself." They didn't take it well. The calls became less frequent. The warmth cooled. My mother accused me of holding grudges. My father said success had made me cold. But something unexpected happened too. They started to realize I wasn't the desperate teenager they had abandoned. I had my own life, my own power, and I didn't need them anymore. One afternoon, my mother called and asked if we could talk. She sounded tired, not dramatic. She said she'd been thinking about everything I said. She admitted they were afraid when I was younger, afraid I'd outgrow them, afraid they couldn't control me, afraid of losing authority. Fear, not discipline, had driven their decision. It wasn't an apology, but it was closer to truth than I'd ever heard from them. I listened quietly. When she finished, she asked, "Is there any chance we can start over?" I thought about the years of silence, the hunger, the loneliness, the strength it took to rebuild myself from nothing. I thought about how easily they reached out once success made me valuable again. Then I answered honestly. "We can move forward," I said, "but we can't pretend the past didn't happen." That answer didn't give them what they wanted. It didn't erase their guilt or guarantee access to my life. But it did something far more powerful. It forced them to face the truth they had avoided for years, that I didn't need their approval, and I never had. And that realization was harder for them to swallow than any rejection. I didn't hear from them for a while after that conversation. Weeks passed, then months. The silence felt different this time, not the cold abandonment I remembered from my teens, but an uneasy distance, like they were recalculating their position. I focused on my life. Work was demanding but fulfilling. I expanded my network, took on bigger projects, and finally allowed myself small joys I used to deny myself out of habit: weekend trips, good food, mornings without panic. I was no longer surviving. I was living. Then one evening, my father called. His voice sounded older, thinner. He didn't start with pride or praise this time. He said my mother had been sick, not critically, but enough to scare them. Hospitals have a way of stripping people of their illusions. He said lying in that room made them think about the past, about choices. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then he said the words I had never expected to hear. "We failed you." I closed my eyes when he said it. Not because it healed everything, but because it finally acknowledged the truth. He didn't justify it. He didn't explain it away. He simply said they had chosen control over care and pride over love. My mother took the phone next. She cried quietly, not theatrically. She said she replayed that night they handed me the suitcase over and over in her mind. She said she had convinced herself I would come back, that I would need them, that they would regain control. "When you didn't," she said, "we told ourselves you didn't want us." I told them something I had never said out loud before. I told them I had wanted them every single day. I had wanted a call, a message, anything that showed I still mattered. But I also told them that wanting someone doesn't mean allowing them to hurt you again. There was silence on the line, heavy but honest. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask to move in. They didn't ask for favors. For the first time, they asked a question without expectation. "What do you need from us now?" My mother asked. I thought about it carefully. I didn't want apologies anymore. I didn't want explanations. I said I needed respect, boundaries, and the freedom to walk away if things turned manipulative again. I said our relationship, if it existed at all, would be on my terms. They agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly, but I noted it without commenting. We started slowly. Short calls. Occasional coffee. No emotional dumping, no financial hints. When my father started to slip into old habits, I stopped the conversation calmly and left. When my mother tried guilt, I named it out loud. Each time, they adjusted. Not perfectly, but noticeably. And with every boundary I enforced, something inside me grew stronger. The real moment of closure came unexpectedly. At a small family gathering hosted by a relative who hadn't seen me since I was a teenager, someone casually said, "You must be so grateful to your parents for raising you so well." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. Before I could respond, my father spoke. "No," he said. She raised herself. My mother nodded, tears in her eyes, and added, "We lost the right to take credit for who she became." That moment did more for me than any apology ever could. They finally said the truth publicly, without being prompted, without trying to soften it. The story they had told themselves, and others, for years cracked wide open. And I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. I realized then that the greatest revenge wasn't cutting them off forever or watching them suffer. It was becoming so whole, so independent, so grounded, that their approval no longer mattered. Their regret didn't define me. Their pride didn't validate me. I had built a life that stood firmly on its own foundation. They did miss me, but not in the way they claimed at first. They missed the version of me they could control. And when they realized that version was gone forever, they were forced to meet the real me as an equal or not at all. I didn't go back to being their child. I became my own person. And that was the ending they never expected, but the one I had earned.